Up YouTube? It's your boy Richardson from Minimum Wage to Millionaire. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here, welcome back. So let's get straight to it. You saw the title. Is Uber Eats still a viable side hustle or side gig in 2026? Now, just want to give you guys a rundown in full transparency. One of my side gigs or side hustles that I do is I'll do Uber Eats on the side. My main, source of income is my overnight job. That's the main source. But I also do Uber Eats on the side. And I've been doing Uber Eats since, I believe, May of 2020. So we're almost approaching 6 full years. On and off, of course. There were a period of time where I did it full time. I think in 2023 or 2024, I did it full time for a few months. I'll get to that a little later because it wasn't that pretty. But overall, just to kind of give you guys my overall point, do I think it's still viable? Yes, but it's going to depend on two things. It's going to depend on your location, and it's going to depend on your mindset or your expectation going into it. And I'll expand a little bit more further. So, the reason why I preference all that to say, and why ultimately the answer is that why Uber Eats is still viable, in my opinion, and in my experience of doing it for almost 6 years, is because Uber Eats is a very quick, efficient, and I would argue, low cost of barrier entry to making some money on the side. A lot of side hustles that you may hear about, things like drop shipping, things like writing a book, things like all those other things, it requires a lot of effort, a lot of startup cost or startup capital, whether it's monetarily with your actual money or also your time investment. It costs a lot to build those revenue streams. Now, I would argue those revenue streams or side hustles are, I would argue, more viable and more, it could be more sustainable. Not saying it will be, but could be more sustainable than Uber Eats. But the trade-off is that compared to Uber Eats, those are a lot more harder to start up and they take a lot. Whereas with Uber Eats, as long as you got a car, has insurance, you have a driver license, social security number, you literally could sign up the same day and start working. And a lot of times they'll do like a background check to, obviously make sure you're not, someone that they wouldn't want representing the company. And as long as you check the boxes and stuff like that, you literally could start driving. I mean, I remember when I did it in like May of 2020, this was during of course, the peak of the pandemic. This is when everyone was deemed, like if you weren't in the medical field or you weren't like a delivery driver or anything like that, you were deemed non-essential and you had to pretty much stay home. Whereas delivery drivers, you were essential workers because it's like, okay, if I can't go to the restaurant because of the pandemic, well, how am I supposed to eat? And that was one of the reasons why I started. And it was very quick, very easy. And at that time, they needed so many drivers that they literally was just like, bro, if you got, like, we don't care what type of car you're driving. If you're, if you got a car, again, you check the bare minimum requirements, you're coming in, right? So the barrier entry is very, very low and very easy. Now, it's a double-edged sword because it was great when the demand was there, and they just needed more drivers. But in markets or locations where the demand is either stagnate or demand has actually gone down, and I don't blame it because, let's be honest, Uber Eats is significantly more expensive to order on as a customer today than it was back in 2020. I think we all agree with that, inflation. So naturally, the demand will either start to, again, stagnate or dip down. When it dips down, but you have all these drivers, basic economics, supply and demand, there's an ample amount of supply of drivers, but the demand of orders is going down. Well, unfortunately, the drivers get hit with it. And that, when I start going more to the cons, I'll expand upon that a little bit further. But lower cost of entry is one of the major, benefits that comes into it. And obviously, when you're getting into side hustle, how quick you could start making money side hustle is very imperative for a lot of people. Another thing is, how good is the money? In case you didn't know, when you drive for Uber Eats or any of these gig apps, you are an independent contractor, which means is that you are your own boss. And a lot of times in the marketing with Uber Eats, they'll really market that aspect too. Like, hey, you're your own boss. You don't got to worry about putting in PTO and all this stuff. They're correct, but they don't tell you about the additional responsibilities of being your own boss, which means you have to set money aside for taxes. A lot of people that make money on Uber Eats, they use it as like beer money, as they say, like fun money, or pay bills, but they don't understand that what they've received from Uber Eats is the gross amount. That's your gross earnings, your gross receipts, right? You got to put money aside for taxes. And Uber Eats and all these side gigs and independent contractor apps, like Instacart, substitute Uber Eats for Instacart, all these things, they all apply the same. They're not withholding your taxes. You got to do it. And you got to do it on a federal level. Now, I live in Florida, so thankfully we don't have state taxes. But if you have state taxes, you have to withhold on a state level. And if you live in like certain cities like St. Louis or I believe New York City in the state of New York, they also have a city tax. So then you have to withhold for that as well. So you got to put on your big boy boxers or your big girl panties and have to do that, right? So that's one of those things where, again, double-edged sword, benefit and a con to that as well. And how much you make money on is not guaranteed, because again, like I said, it is going to be market dependent. If you live in a market where there's stamped amount of orders and people are always ordering, and let's say you live in a market where people are tipping you well, because one of the biggest revenue streams, or one of the biggest, I guess, contributions to your earnings is through tips, right? Because it's kind of a tip job. Uber will pay you a set base pay, and then most of your earnings you'll see will come from the tips, meaning, hey, you deliver it to them, you know, we appreciate your service, therefore we'll offer a tip. Now, of course, the customers are not forced to tip, nor are they, obligated to tip, but they are encouraged to tip. Just like your server, you technically don't have to tip your server unless there's some type of like automatic gratuity where they just literally take it out of the check, which at that point, I mean, that it is what it is. But aside from that, so it's the same thing with the drivers as well. So, one of the, I guess, important things you have to know is that you are at the mercy, in some cases, of the driver, right? There's going to be some drivers that are not going to tip. And, that's something you have to take into account. And then there's some drivers, not drivers. There are some customers that won't tip. And unfortunately, there's also some customers that will do what's known as tip baiting, which is essentially they'll because with Uber Eats and all these apps, you could put the tip up front, right? So you don't have to, it's not like you get the service, then you tip. No, you could add the tip up front, right? Which will show a larger amount. And this incentivizes drivers to go get those orders, right? But what ends up happening is that some customers find a way, unfortunately, where they'll do that and then they'll remove the tip. Now, the intention behind it is they'll remove the tip if, you didn't provide a good service. If, you decide to take a cup and whatever. We all seen crazy, gig drivers where they almost have this sense of entitlement. They have a sense of, like belonging, like, hey, this is mine. And, they're just not professional. So I understand the reason why that feature is there, but you have to also take the fact there's always going to be people that will try to take advantage of something. So what they'll then do is they'll add that tip in, and then they could remove it, at least on Uber Eats. I don't know about DoorDash and Grubhub and all the other apps, but on Uber Eats, you can remove it 1 hour after the delivery. So what a lot of people do is they'll get the food, the service is to their standards or even exceeds their standards, and then they'll just bail out on the tip. Not nice, but the world we live in, you just have people that unfortunately just don't have any standards and integrity. I mean, it just is what it is. So those are just things you have to keep in mind. And then lastly, of course, and this kind of pegs to the independent contractor, is that you are responsible for your expenses. Like I mentioned, you are your own boss, and you have to withhold taxes on your own, but you also have to manage your expenses, because your biggest expense by far will be your vehicle. So things like, gas, things like your oil changes, like tire repairs, all these things will have to be factored in order for you to get your profit, because you are essentially your own business. So you can't just look at, how much am I getting paid a day? You have to look at it from a cost, I'm sorry, a gross to your cost basis. So how much did it cost me to make that much money? You break everything down, and it's going to be different, because if you're driving, a super big SUV, you're probably going to be burning gas. Or if you're driving a truck, or you're driving a Toyota Prius, you're a lot more gas efficient. So it's going to depend, but you have to run the numbers and make it make sense for you, especially with these gas prices. As I mentioned in my last video, you gotta have to make it make sense. And I can't tell you what the number is, because I don't know you. I don't know what you expect out of this app, but just take all those things into mind. But the great thing is that, and please consult with your CPA, I'm not a tax professional, is that those are tax deductible. So make sure things that are necessary and ordinary for your business, so your phone, right, because that's how you get your orders, your gas, your stuff like that. There's also two different routes. You could go the standard, where they'll give you a set amount, like I think it's like 72 cents for 2026, and every business mile you drive, you just times it by 72 cents, right? Or you could do actual expenses, which is how much does it actually cost minus the personal, unless the car is fully for business. And then you just work on that, and then you can, and obviously, like with anything with taxes, whichever one gives you the largest deductions on your taxes, you go with that method. Again, consult with your CPA before you try these things out. So overall, those are my, I guess, kind of thoughts, my takeaway. I want to just spell it all out to you guys. Personally, I think Uber Eats is still viable of a side hustle in 2026. However, like I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video, there was a period of time where I did it full time. And I personally, from my experience and in my market, I personally don't believe Uber Eats is viable full time. With the gas prices being up, inflation being up, the cost of everything being up, with I'm not somebody that kind of like doom and glooms and tell people, oh yeah, the recession is coming, guys, run away, fire and brimstone. Like I'm not that guy, right? I like to be a lot more optimistic on life and financials, but at the same time, I'm not going to be delirious or deliberately ignorant and ignore the obvious signs that the consumer is straining, right? And that could be financially, that could be physically, spiritually, I would argue. And people, for one reason or another, are not going to be as generous on ordering these apps, which means the demands would be low. So make sure that if you do side hustles, try it out for like do Uber. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. I just finished working overnight. Try it out for like a weekend or a couple of days out of the week, whichever is convenient, whether it could be after your 9-to-5 job. Maybe you could dedicate a weekend to try it out. Try different areas and spots of your zones, and see what works for you. Try to get a good feeling of the restaurants, the routes you would like to go on. Obviously, if there's bad parts of your neighborhood and you see that Uber's trying to give you orders over there, obviously don't go to the bad parts, right? I don't want something happen to you. But once you get a good knowledge about your areas, and you get knowledge about how much it's going to cost you to deliver, right? How much it's going to cost in terms of gas, maintenance, all that stuff. You factor in your phone, right? You factor all these things. Now you have kind of like a knowledgeable, like a blueprint of how Uber Eats could work for you. And then you build your overall structure around that. Like, for example, for me, I'm making this video too long, so I'm going to finish this and close it off. For me, I only deliver Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays for the dinner rush. So I put in about 10 to 12 hours a week, right? So roughly 3-4 hours per those 3 days. Obviously, some exceptions. There's some days where, I get off church on Sunday and I'm just kind of want to chill and vibe, take the Sabbath, whether it's on a Sunday or Saturday or whatever. But generally about 12 hours, and I'll usually bring in somewhere in the ballpark of about $250 to $300 for those 12 hours, generally, right? Because I'm doing it during the peak times, and I'm very selective of what orders to pick. Now, again, this is gross, so I have to factor in the cost, everything like that. So Profit wise, after taxes, all that, I'm probably walking away with somewhere in the ballpark of like 210, 220 out of the $300. Which, I mean, for me, I think it's fine. Maybe for you, it may be too low of a profit. Maybe it's too good to be true. Again, you got to run the numbers and make it make sense for you. But yeah, I think it's worth it as a side hustle. And the most important part is that this is supplemental income. So this is not, oh, I got to focus and lock in on this job full time. But it's more so, okay, I got my other side hustles, I got my other job. This is just supplemental income. And I think when you look at it from that mindset, you will succeed in these gig apps, including Uber Eats. So won't take too much of your time. Thank you guys for letting me ramble on. I'm going to go ahead and start heading home. So thank you guys. It's Richardson from Minimum Wage to Millionaire signing out. May the Lord be with you guys all today. Have a blessed day. Thank you.